Well, on this most holy of nights, we hear again the story of the babe of Bethlehem, the greatest story ever told, the most wondrous gift ever given. How blessed we are that God, the creator of heaven and earth, chose to send a precious part of himself to take the form of a tiny, vulnerable baby and come to live among us. And he came simply to tell us the joyful good news of God's love for us. The good news that every baby that has ever been born into this world, every baby yet to be born, is loved by God equally and without favour of one over another. Every child that ever was, is now and is to come, every single one, loved beyond all knowing and in a way that is beyond our understanding. Awesome, awesome love. There is a beautiful psalm that speaks of the mystery of God's love for his people. What are human beings that you should seek them out? The psalmist sings. You have made them little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honour. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands and put all things under their feet. This is a wondrous thing indeed, especially when we consider what we mere human beings have done with the power that God has given us. Through the ages, far too many have taken what God has given and despoiled, ravaged and ruined the precious gifts that have been lavished upon humankind. The earth, ourselves, other people. Terrible acts of harm, often done without a second thought or a backward glance. Humankind has ofttimes been far too careless with what God has given us. Take the people Israel. They had wandered far from the paths of righteousness and justice that God called them to. Love me and love one another, or your future will be in jeopardy, was the message God gave them through Isaiah. And with the warning came a promise. The day will come, says God, when I will put all things right, and my justice and righteousness will reign over the earth. They didn't listen or heed the call. So the promise that God made did not grace their time. Fast forward 700 or 800 years, and wondrously and wonderfully God makes good his promise. The one called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, slips into the world to make it his own once more. Unfortunately, here we are, 2,000 years later, and God's plan is still a work in progress. But even though there is still a long, long way to go before the earth and all that lies therein is the paradise of love and peace that God made it to be, the world is a much better place than it was when Jesus was a newborn baby lying in Mary's trembling arms. Oh, and how she must have trembled at the awesome responsibility of being mother to the Son of God. How Joseph must also have wondered quite what the future would hold. But fearful and anxious though they must have been, they did as they were asked. They loved and they nurtured the gift that they had been given. They raised the child that had been entrusted into their care. Their story is one of simple humility and obedience. Even though they lived out their lives in a world of uncertainty, cruelty, and injustice, they never faltered or failed in the task that God called them to. Trusting in God, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, they were enfolded in God's love. Knowing God was with them, they asked for very little and expected nothing from the world. In return, they were given a whole new world of possibilities. The simplicity of the birth of the Christ child and the faithfulness of his earthly parents point to the life that God would have us live. To live simply, caring for one another and the gifts that God has entrusted into our hands, ensuring that righteousness and justice prevail. This is what we are called to do, as was Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. This is not an easy way to live. Think how harsh life was for the Holy Family, giving birth in a shared space with animals, fleeing persecution, living with difference. How hard that must have been. It's not easy these days either, being human. And there's no doubt that 2020 has been the most difficult and saddest of years. Looking out over the landscape of our shared lives, there won't be many among us who's not carrying a burden of disappointment, sadness, or anxiety in our heart. And this is indeed a Christmas unlike any other we have ever known. But it is Christmas. And there is so much that we can be thankful for. That's why we're here tonight, together, in one way or another. Hearing again the story of heaven touching earth all those years ago, celebrating the most wonderful gift of all time, Jesus, and reminding ourselves that although, like Mary, we may be trembling with fear for the future, we are held fast in God's arms of boundless love. This is the love that will never, ever let us go. The love that eases our path through life, lights up the world with hope, and shines so brightly that it takes our breath away once we catch a glimpse of its radiance. Tonight, we lift our eyes heavenward to catch a glimpse of that love, and remarkably and wonderfully, if we know where to look, we will see it. Remember this. It's not by chance that we festoon our world with twinkly lights at Christmas. Every bulb is put in place as an act of love to spread joy and happiness. If that's not God in action, I don't know what is. So look up, see love, and be radiant. God is with us. And so, my friends, a peaceful but joyful and twinkly Christmas to you all. Amen.